Graduates and faculty, staff, and all invited guests, please welcome our 2016 commencement speaker, Verne Sedlacek.
I'm supposed to eat this mic so you all can hear me. Can you all hear me? Good morning, everybody. It's a great day for me, and thank you, Chancellor Kegel, for that very generous introduction. And I'd also like to thank you and the faculty and the staff for inviting me back to Havre. It's great to be back. I miss it. A lot's changed, but a lot hasn't changed. And so it's been it's a great honor for me to be here. I'm so humbled by when I was asked to be able to speak to you guys today, because it's always been, my dream to get back, as Chancellor Kegel said. But most of all, I would like to congratulate all the students who are receiving their degree today. It is an amazing accomplishment. I'd also like to congratulate the parents, the friends, the relatives who've supported these students during their goals of achieving this major accomplishment. So what I'd really like you all to do is stand up, give the graduates a standing ovation, because you deserve it. Stay standing for 1 minute. Stay standing, don't sit down. I don't know, did all of you turn off your cell phones? Yes? Well, I'm going to allow you to turn them back on to take a selfie, because I want to take a selfie, and I've never done it before. So please, take a selfie. Let's see if I can remember how to do it. A lot of great-looking people in the audience. I'm not one of them, so thank you. Now, keep standing. Keep standing. Clap 3 times. Excellent. Okay, one more time. Great. Now, you can all sit down and relax. All you have to do is listen to me for the next few minutes. So, coming back to Havre brings back such great memories of my formative years. I was so fortunate to grow up in Montana, as many of you have been, and I really count my blessings every day for that opportunity. One of the memories that comes rushing back to me as I sit here today was actually July 20th, 1969. Does anybody know what happened July 20th, 1969? Any history majors? Well, that was the day that the U.S. landed Apollo 11 on the moon. That was the first time that man had ever stepped on the moon. And what was interesting to me is my family and I sat in front of our TV over here at 52 Saddle Butte Drive, transfixed on what was going on. Now, I always sat really close to the TV. I was probably about 6 inches away. I was a tall, geeky, awkward kid with really thick glasses. Now, in thinking about it, I may have had really thick glasses because I always sat like 6 inches away from the TV. But on that day, we heard Neil Armstrong say, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." And a few minutes later, we saw them plant the stars and stripes on the moon. Now, everybody thinks about 1969. They think, wow, those were the good old days. Let me tell you, they weren't. I mean, we had high inflation, a bad economy. We had a raging war in Vietnam. Richard Nixon was our president. Those weren't the good old days. But for those very few minutes, as we watched what the U.S. has accomplished through its daring and ingenuity. Now, you're probably wondering, sitting out there saying, what's this guy talking about? What is something that happened when dinosaurs walked the earth actually has to do with me? And it's interesting because landing on the moon was the end. It wasn't the beginning. The beginning actually took place in 1962, when John F. Kennedy said, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and other things because they are hard." That is, to me, sums up eloquently what I want to talk about today, the theme of my speech. Doing things that are hard because they are hard, and not taking the easy way out. What does it mean to do hard things? What really is hard? Sometimes you don't know it till you see it, but one of the ways I define things that are hard are things that scare that crap out of me. And I worry as a country that we've gone to doing two things that are too easy, that we look at mediocrity as being a great thing. And if we live our lives doing the hard thing, we can look back and feel good about what we've done. As Chancellor Cagle said, I decided to go to the East Coast to go to school. I always anticipated I would go to school in Montana, but I had the opportunity to go to the East Coast. I did it because it was hard. It was not safe, it was not comfortable, but it scared me to death. When I got to the East Coast, I'd never been to the East Coast before. When I got there, I found people in the East Coast spoke a completely different language than we here in Montana speak. I mean, they talked really fast, and they said words like creek instead of crick. Creek, what's a creek? They said words like root instead of root. They'd never heard of a coolie. Never. They didn't know what pop was. And when I went to a store and asked for a sack, they said, "You really want a burlap bag?" I'm like, they had no idea. And not once did I hear the term, "you betcha." But I went there, and what I learned was that I had grown up with an innate feeling of inferiority from Easterners that had been handed down to me from my parents. Once I was there and spent time, I realized that people from Montana were just as smart, they were just as driven, they were just as hardworking, but they were a hell of a lot nicer than those East Coast guys. So I get to the East Coast, and I decided to do the hard thing. I decided to play football and rugby in college. And it was not nearly as fun, nor did we win nearly as much as the Blue Ponies won. So go Blue Ponies. In fact, at one point, my college team was ranked as one of the worst in Division I football. The Blue Ponies were never ranked worse than anything. So I got injured playing football. Whenever you do things, you take risks. And I injured my shoulder. And I had to go in for surgery. And while I was in there, I had this beautiful nurse who would used to bring me food periodically. This angel of mercy. So I decided to do the hard thing, it was really hard for me, and ask her out. So as I was leaving the hospital after a couple days, I said, "Would you like to go out with me?" Sometimes risks have downside. She said no. And I went crashing down in a huge ball of flame. It was a crash and burn. But as it turns out, a few days later, she called me. And she acquiesced to go out on a date with me. And here we are, 40 years later. We're still married. I have two great sons, Ryan, who you met earlier. And the thing, it turns out, when I asked her why she went out with me, she said, "Because you take rejection so well." And I still take rejection really well. Now, one of the things that involves doing the right thing, doing the hard thing, is risk. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But I remember, actually before the moon landing, my brother, a friend of his, and I decided that there were too many ants in Havre. Now, I don't mean this, your mother's sister. What I mean is the kind that live in anthills. And so one day, over there from 52 Saddle Butte Drive, we filled up a gallon container of gasoline. We were going to take care of those ants. And so we walked over 13th Street, and in those days, it wasn't green between the northern student family housing. It was prairie. And so we found our first anthill, poured our gasoline on it, set it on fire. I learned on that day that there's lots of risks that you can take. And one of them was the wind would come up. And it seemed like on that first anthill, when we did that, the wind immediately started blowing. And before we knew it, we had a prairie fire. It was racing towards the northern family housing. And you find out in a crisis what you're made of. So my brother's buddy, he ran home and hid under the bed. I told my brother, go and call the fire, go home and call the fire department. We lived right at the top of the hill. And I said, I'm going to run and evacuate the student family housing. So here's this 11-year-old kid running down, right? Pounding on doors, get out, get out, get out. And I think there were a lot of people saying, what is this kid doing? Is he a challenge in some way or another? Because this doesn't make any sense. Well, as it turns out, you could probably guess, the student family housing is still there. The fire department came, put out the fire, and I'm happy to say I've really come full circle. From almost burning down MSU-Northern to being your commencement speaker today. Now, I didn't tell Chancellor Kegel this story. That's probably the first time he's heard it, which is why I'm here today. The other thing is, one of the reasons I haven't come back is because I think the statute of limitations has now run out, so I'm safe. So I think about risk a lot. And one of the things that I think about is the game of risk. Has anybody ever played the game of risk? Great game. For those of you who don't know, it's basically you have a series of armies and you try to conquer the world throwing dice. My friend Chris Young and I and two other guys used to play Risk almost every weekend, day-long games. You're probably saying, wow, what a social life. I said, yeah, that was pretty much the height of my week. And one of the things that I realized with the game of Risk is that the way you won is you build up large armies and then you let your opponent, attack you and lose, right? The fact is the game of Risk teaches us exactly the wrong thing. The game of Risk teaches us to play defense. The game of Risk does not teach us to attack. It does not teach us to go and seek to do the hard thing. And when we do that, there will be a risk of failure. And you will fail and you will lose. The key is how you deal with failure and loss. It's interesting because I mentioned earlier that as I travel around the country, I feel like we've gone to this, focus on being average, focus on being mediocre. It's not your generation, it's all generations. Part of it may be, you get blogged by anonymous people who call you every name in the book. But the fact is, what I want to leave you with is, being mediocre is not acceptable. And obviously, none of you in this room are mediocre today. Continue to focus on your lives and improving it. It was interesting because I was met with the head of an investment committee for a large West Coast university who had just gotten $1 billion. And I was talking to this man, and I said, what's your objective? He said, I just want to be average. And I was incredulous at this statement. They raised this $1 billion because they want to cure cancer. And I said to him, how could you want to be average when the fact is you want to do great things with this money? And I think I did finally get through to him. But it's this desire that we all have, and we all have it, for comfort. It's the desire to certainty. We all want certainty. We all want to be able to predict the future. We all want to feel comfortable. But the fact of the matter is, the world is not certain. There's only two things that are certain, and we know that: death and taxes. So be prepared to take risk. Be prepared to take uncertainty. I'm reminded of a show. I still watch too much TV. I don't know if you've ever seen the Goldbergs. Anybody seen the Goldbergs? So in the beginning, they have a little jingle that's really become one of my themes. It said, I don't know the future, but the past keeps getting clearer every day. Which I think is great. We spend so much time worrying about the future, trying to evaluate every permutation, thinking about the past, thinking about all the things we could have done differently, that we forget to live in the present, that we forget to think about the things that are hard today. So I'll leave you with this idea that basically what we want to do is we want to think about the present and think about doing the things that are hard. The past is over. The future is unknowable. And so thinking about focusing on doing those hard things today is important. And when we do those hard things, failure goes part and parcel. We will fail. We will fail. You know, we forget about 1967. We were reveling in the landing on the moon, but in 1967 there was the Apollo 1 fire. 3 astronauts were killed 2 years before we landed on the moon. Gus Grissom, Roger Chaffee, Ed White. They died. But people focused on what went wrong, addressing it, and we were able to get to the future. I mean, I read recently there's a Princeton professor who's actually put out on the web, I don't know if you've seen it, put out on the web a thing he calls his CV of failures. The man has degrees from Harvard and Oxford, very accomplished, won many awards, but he actually listed on the web all the things that he failed at, jobs he didn't get, doctoral programs he didn't get into, articles he didn't get published. And the list goes on for pages. One of the things he says is that often our failures are invisible, but our successes are often very visible. So think about, as we go through life, the things we have failed at. Now, you probably sitting here today thinking, what did this guy ever fail at? I failed at so much stuff. It is amazing to me that I'm standing here today. Because I did choose to do the hard thing. I think back to when we lost the state championship game to Butte Central right up here at Blue Pony Stadium. It still hurts me to this very day. I think about playing in college, and you know, I was an offensive lineman, so one of my jobs was to block. And our quarterback was named Ronnie Beeble. And one game I could not even come close to blocking the guy I was supposed to block. And I just would turn around and see him getting smashed, time after time. I still remember. So I ran into Ron in the airport in Chicago, a few years ago. And I said, "How you doing?" He said, "Well, I had both knees replaced." Thank you very much, Verne. So even our failures from long ago come back to haunt us. He said, "The last time I remember seeing you was you were picking me up off the ground saying, 'I'm so sorry, Beebs.'" Certainly, one of the most recent failures I want to talk to you about is what happened during the crash, the 2008-2009 Great Recession. It was a horrible time. Markets got crushed. And clients that I had lost a lot of money. These are colleges and universities, these are foundations, these are hospitals. They took it on the chin. And so I looked at it and I said, well, what happened? I said, I was wrong. I did not predict the Great Recession. I did not predict the market going down. And my propensity to take risk was too high. So I realized a lot of things from that I could recover from this, although I'm still in recovery mode from 2008, 2009, that you start with admitting that you made a mistake, admitting that you failed. Admit it. Don't hide behind other people. Don't hide behind circumstances. Just get up in front of people and say, I was wrong. Next, what you want to do is you want to deal with your own emotions. Failure is an emotional thing. The one thing you do not want to do, which a lot of people have a tendency to do, is actually roll up into a ball and say, I never want to deal with it again. But the fact of the matter is, you have to think about what happened. Take an objective view. Write down the reason it failed, what you did wrong, what you could have done differently. Talk to friends about it. And then go back and start thinking about the things that you did right. So you want to analyze. You want to process your emotions. You want to focus on what you could do differently in an objective way. And then you want to think about the good things. There is no shame in failure. The only shame is if you're crippled by it. So I have another saying I use all the time. It goes like this. Analyze your failures and celebrate your successes. Take time to roll around in the things that happened well, that you did right. And there are lots of them because we all tend to focus on things that went wrong. So, I want to talk a couple minutes about the future. So you graduates today are sitting out there saying, well, look what's going on in the world. We have climate change. We have, a government that doesn't work. We have $14 trillion of US debt. We have lots of student loans. We have income inequality. And it's a daunting thing to think about. However, during my day, we had, as I said, Richard Nixon losing the war in Vietnam, Watergate. A thing that we don't even talk about today called stagflation, high inflation, poor economic growth. And it's interesting because my generation was actually able to get through all that stuff. And we were able to give your generation all new sets of problems that you have to deal with. You're welcome. So, as we think about you as a generation, you millennials, you're now the largest generation in this country and probably the largest generation ever in the history of the U.S. In 2015, there are more millennials than there are baby boomers, my generation. And we've done a great job as baby boomers, kind of deciding that you millennials are pretty worthless. You're self-absorbed, you spend too much time on your cell phone looking at, you're lazy, it's all about me. And when I look back, you're narcissistic. And you know what I say to that? Horse hockey. Everybody know what horse hockey is? If you get me in a more polite company, I will tell you what it is. I mean, it is completely wrong. Millennials are great. They're ambitious. They're the best educated generation in the history of our country. They are the only generation that's grown up in technology in their blood and knows how to deal with technology and knows how to use it. They're global. They focus in real time. And quite frankly, my generation can't handle that stuff. So while I said I can't see the future, what I do know is that your future is great, that your generation is prepared, that your generation will make this country and the world a better place. So thank you for that. I'm going to leave you with 3 words. Dare to be great. Dare to be great. Dare to be great. Go out there, take risks, do the hard thing. Don't go for mediocrity. And then you will end up changing the world and being successful. So 40 years from now, when you're up here giving commencement speech to MSU-Northern graduates, you can say, I'm here because I dared to be great, and I did the hard things. And there was this great guy who was an old man who I don't really remember, but he told me to do the hard things. Congratulations, and thank you all very much.